Saad had always been the kind of girl who worked twice as hard as everyone else. At the university in Lagos, most students knew her as the quiet girl who was always studying in the library late at night. While others were going to parties or football games, Saad was usually buried in textbooks, chasing the future she believed she had to build on her own. She often joked with her friends that sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford yet. That afternoon started like any other day. Saad was sitting in the campus library with two of her friends, trying to finish an assignment before the deadline. Suddenly, a sharp pain twisted through her stomach. At first she tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just hunger or stress. But within minutes the pain became unbearable. She bent forward in her chair, clutching her stomach as sweat formed on her forehead. "Saad, are you okay?" one of her friends asked, noticing her face turning pale. I don't know," Saad whispered, her voice shaking. "Something really hurts." The pain kept getting worse. Soon she could barely stand. Her friends immediately grabbed their bags and rushed her out of the library. One of them called a ride while the other supported Saad as they hurried toward the campus gate. The trip to the hospital felt endless. Saad was curled up in the back seat, breathing heavily and trying not to cry. Every small bump in the road sent another wave of pain through her body. When they finally reached the emergency department, nurses quickly rushed her inside. Doctors began asking questions, running tests, and examining her stomach. Everything started moving very fast. After what felt like forever, one of the doctors returned with a serious look on his face. "We need to operate," he said calmly. "Your condition requires emergency surgery." Saada's heart dropped. Surgery. She had never even spent a night in the hospital before. Her friends quickly called her parents. About an hour later, they finally arrived at the hospital. But something felt strange the moment they walked into the room. Instead of looking worried, both of them seemed distracted. Her mother kept checking her phone, while her father stepped outside twice to answer calls. Saad lay quietly on the hospital bed, watching them and feeling a small knot of confusion growing inside her chest. She was about to go into emergency surgery, but somehow it didn't feel like the most important thing on their minds. As Saad lay on the hospital bed waiting for surgery, an old feeling slowly returned to her chest, a feeling she had known almost her entire life. It was the quiet, painful reminder that in her family, someone else always came first. That someone was her younger brother, Kunal. Kunal wasn't just any student at his school. He was the star football player, the one everyone talked about, the one teachers praised and neighbors bragged about. Every time he stepped onto the field, the stands were full of people cheering his name. And Saada's parents were always the loudest voices in the crowd. Growing up, Saad had watched it happen again and again. When Kunal had a football game, everything else in the house stopped. Family dinners were moved, important plans were cancelled, and everyone had to be at the stadium. Her parents would wear shirts with Kunal's number on the back and shout his name like he was already a national star. Meanwhile, Saada's achievements were often treated like small background news. When she won an academic award in secondary school, her mother hugged her quickly and said, "That's nice, Saad." Then 5 minutes later the conversation had turned back to Kunal's upcoming tournament. When she got accepted into the university with excellent grades, her father simply nodded and said, "Good, keep studying." But the same week Kunal scored 2 goals in a school match. Her parents celebrated by taking him out for a big dinner. Saad had learned not to complain. She told herself it didn't matter. She focused on her studies and tried to believe that success would speak for itself someday. But now, lying in the hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a sharp pain still pulsing through her stomach, those memories came rushing back stronger than ever. Her mother sat beside the bed, but she wasn't really paying attention. Every few minutes, her phone lit up and she immediately looked down at the screen. "Oh, the match has started," her mother said suddenly, almost excited. Saad blinked slowly, confused. "What match?" "Kunal's school game," her mother replied quickly, already scrolling through messages. "Your father is getting updates from one of the other parents." Her father stood near the window, also staring at his phone. A small smile appeared on his face. "Kunal almost scored just now," he said proudly. Saad stared at the ceiling for a moment, feeling something heavy settle in her chest. She was about to go into emergency surgery. Doctors had just told her it was serious. Yet somehow, the football game still seemed to be the biggest event of the night. A quiet uneasiness crept through her mind. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder, something more familiar. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Saad began to wonder if things were about to unfold exactly the way they always had. Because when it came to choosing between her and Kunal, she already knew who usually won. The hours before surgery passed in a blur for Saad. Nurses moved quickly around the room, checking machines, adjusting the four in her arm, and asking her questions she barely had the energy to answer. The pain in her stomach kept coming in waves, sharp and exhausting. At one point, a nurse gently rolled her bed toward the operating room. The bright hospital lights on the ceiling passed above her one by one as she was pushed down the long corridor. Everything felt cold and quiet. Just before the doors to the operating room opened, Saad turned her head slightly. Her parents were standing a few steps away. Her mother was still holding her phone in her hand. Her father looked distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. "Everything will be fine," her mother said quickly, but her eyes dropped back to the phone almost immediately. Saad wanted to say something else, maybe ask them to stay, but before she could speak, the doctors wheeled her inside. The surgery lasted several hours. Inside the operating room, doctors and nurses worked carefully, focusing on the emergency that had brought her there. Machines beeped softly as they monitored her heartbeat and breathing. Finally, after a long and delicate procedure, the lead surgeon removed his gloves and nodded. "The surgery was successful," he said. Late that night, Saad slowly began to wake up in the recovery room. Her eyelids felt heavy and her body weak. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The lights were dim and everything around her felt quiet and distant. She blinked slowly and looked around the room. The first thing she noticed was the empty chair beside her bed. Her parents were not there. At first she thought maybe they had just stepped out for a moment. Her throat felt dry as she tried to speak. "Mom," she whispered weakly. No answer. "Dad." Still nothing. The room stayed silent except for the soft beeping of the monitor beside her bed. After a few minutes, a nurse walked in to check on her. She smiled gently when she saw Saad awake. "Oh, you're up," the nurse said kindly. "The surgery went very well. You're going to be okay." Saad swallowed slowly, her voice barely louder than a breath. Where are my parents?" The nurse paused for just a second. Her expression shifted in a way that made the air in the room suddenly feel heavier. "Well," the nurse said awkwardly, "they were here earlier." Saad waited, her heart beating a little faster. "They had to leave," the nurse continued quietly. "Leave?" Saad repeated, confused. The nurse hesitated again before speaking. "They said your brother has an important football game tonight." For a moment, Saad didn't react at all. It felt like the words were hanging in the air but hadn't fully reached her yet. Her eyes slowly moved back to the empty chair beside her bed. Her parents had left the hospital. They had left while she was still unconscious after surgery. And the reason was the same one she had heard her whole life. Her brother had a game. Saad stared silently at the ceiling, the shock sitting deep inside her chest. In that quiet hospital room, she realized something that hurt more than the surgery itself. Even at the moment she needed them the most, she still wasn't the one they chose. The hospital room became very quiet after the nurse left. Saad lay still on the bed, staring at the ceiling while the soft beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence. Her stomach still hurt from the surgery, and every small movement sent a dull ache through her body. The anesthesia made her feel heavy and tired, but sleep refused to come. Her eyes slowly moved around the room. Across from her, another patient was lying in bed while two family members sat beside him. One of them held his hand while the other adjusted his blanket. They spoke softly, checking if he was comfortable. A few feet away, another bed had a young woman resting while her mother sat close by, gently brushing her hair away from her face. Everywhere Saad looked, someone had someone sitting beside them, someone waiting for them to wake up. Someone who had chosen to stay. Saad slowly turned her head toward the empty chair beside her own bed again. The chair looked so out of place now, like it was waiting for someone who had already decided not to come back. Her chest felt tight. The physical pain from the surgery was bad, but the feeling growing inside her heart felt even heavier. She tried to tell herself that maybe her parents would come back later. Maybe after the game ended. Maybe they would rush in, apologizing and explaining that they had no choice. But deep down, a quiet voice inside her already knew the truth. This wasn't the first time she had been second. Growing up, she had watched her parents drop everything for Connell. His games, his trophies, his dreams always seemed bigger, louder, and more important. Saad had always been the responsible one, quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who understood. But lying there in that hospital bed, weak and alone after surgery, something inside her finally cracked. For the first time she stopped making excuses for them. A tear slowly rolled down the side of her face and into the pillow. It wasn't loud crying. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter. A deep, painful realization. She remembered the moment the nurse had spoken those words. They had to go. Your brother has a game. Saad closed her eyes, letting the silence of the hospital surround her. That night felt longer than any night she had ever lived through. The hours passed slowly as nurses came in and out to check her vitals, adjust her medicine, and make sure she was recovering well. But when they left, the silence always returned, and the empty chair beside her bed stayed empty. By the time morning finally began to approach and the sky outside the hospital window started turning pale, Saad had come to a realization she could never ignore again. It wasn't just about the football game. It wasn't just about one night. The truth was something she had been avoiding her entire life. She had never really been the priority in her own family. And somehow, in that quiet hospital room, she knew that realization was going to change everything. Morning slowly arrived through the large hospital window. A soft golden light filled the room as the sun began to rise over the city. Nurses moved quietly through the hallway, starting their morning rounds. Some patients were waking up while others were still sleeping. Saad had barely slept at all. Her body still felt weak from the surgery, and every time she moved, a sharp soreness reminded her of what she had just gone through. But the physical pain wasn't the only thing weighing on her. The silence of the night before still sat heavy in her chest. The chair beside her bed was still empty. Her parents had never come back. Saad stared quietly at the blanket covering her legs, trying to push the thoughts away. Maybe they would visit later today. Maybe they were busy. Maybe. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A tall man in a white coat stepped inside the room. He looked calm and professional, but there was a kindness in his eyes that immediately made the room feel a little warmer. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. "You must be Saad." She nodded slightly. "I'm Dr. Kofi Mensah," he continued. "I was part of the surgical team last night." Saad tried to sit up a little straighter, but the movement made her wince. "Easy," the doctor said kindly. "You went through a major surgery. Your body needs time to recover." He walked closer and began checking the monitors beside her bed. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the machines. Then the doctor glanced at the empty chair next to her bed. "Did your family step out?" he asked gently. Saad hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to explain it. Saying it out loud somehow made it feel even worse. "They had somewhere to be," she said quietly. Dr. Mensah didn't ask more questions right away, but the understanding in his expression showed that he had already guessed the truth. After years of working in hospitals, he had seen many situations like this. Some patients had rooms full of visitors. Others had no one. He pulled a chair closer and sat down beside the bed. "You did very well during the surgery," he said. "It was serious, but we were able to fix the problem in time. With proper rest, you should make a full recovery." Saad nodded, but her eyes stayed on the blanket. After a moment, the doctor spoke again, this time in a softer voice. "You know," he said slowly, "I've worked in hospitals for a long time, and I've seen something interesting." Saad looked up slightly. "Sometimes the people who overlook you," he continued, "don't actually realize what they're missing." The words hung in the quiet room. Dr. Mensah leaned back in the chair and gave a small, thoughtful smile. "I've seen patients who were ignored, underestimated, or treated like they weren't important," he said. "And years later, those same people became doctors, scientists, leaders, people who changed lives." For the first time that morning, Saad felt something inside her chest shift slightly. Not pain. Something else. The doctor stood up and gently patted the side of her bed. "Your story isn't defined by who showed up yesterday," he said calmly. "It's defined by what you decide to become tomorrow." Saad watched him walk toward the door, his words echoing quietly in her mind. For the first time since waking up after surgery, the weight in her chest felt a little lighter. And without realizing it, the strength she needed to move forward had just begun to grow. A few days later, Saad was finally discharged from the hospital. Walking out of the building felt strange. The air outside was warm and bright, but inside her chest there was still a quiet heaviness. The memory of that long night after surgery had not disappeared. The empty chair beside her hospital bed, the silence, the words the nurse had said. "Your brother has a game." Her parents had picked her up from the hospital, but the ride home was quiet and awkward. They spoke mostly about Connell's match from that night, how well he had played, and how proud everyone at the stadium had been. Saad sat in the back seat, staring out the window and listening without saying much. Something inside her had changed. Before the surgery, she had always tried to earn their attention. She studied hard hoping they would notice. She worked harder hoping they would finally be proud of her. But that night in the hospital had made something very clear. If she kept waiting for their approval, she might spend her whole life waiting. So Saad made a quiet decision. She would stop trying to compete for attention. Instead, she would build a life so strong that it didn't depend on anyone noticing her. When she returned to university, she threw herself into her studies with a new kind of focus. Her major was biomedical engineering, a field that combined medicine and technology. It was challenging, complex, and required long hours in labs and libraries. But Saad didn't mind the hard work. In fact, she welcomed it. Late nights in the laboratory became normal for her. While other students complained about difficult assignments, Saad kept going. Every project, every exam, every research opportunity became another step forward. Professors began to notice her dedication. One of them recommended her for a competitive research program focused on improving surgical technology. Saad worked on developing tools that could help doctors perform operations more safely and efficiently. The project earned attention from other universities. Soon she was offered her first academic scholarship, then another, and another. For the first time in her life, people were recognizing her efforts, not because she was related to someone else, but because of what she had achieved on her own. Years passed, and Saad continued pushing forward. Her research papers began appearing in international journals. She was invited to speak at conferences and collaborate with scientists from other countries. Slowly, her name started becoming known in the biomedical engineering world. Sometimes, late at night after finishing another long research session, Saad would remember the hospital room where she had once lain alone after surgery. The quiet, empty chair, and the moment when she realized she had never been the priority. Instead of breaking her, that moment had done something else. It had given her a reason to rise. Years passed, and the quiet girl who once studied alone in the university library slowly became someone very different. Saad had finished her degree with outstanding results. Her research in biomedical engineering had already caught the attention of several medical institutions, but she wasn't satisfied with just publishing papers or working in a lab. She wanted to create something real, something that could actually help people survive the kind of surgeries she once went through. So after years of research, long nights, and countless experiments, Saad made a bold decision. She started her own medical technology company. First, it was small, very small. The company operated from a modest workspace with only a few engineers and researchers who believed in her vision. They worked with limited funding, simple equipment, and a lot of determination. But Saad had something powerful driving her forward. She remembered what it felt like to lie on that hospital bed, scared and vulnerable. She remembered how quickly life could change when someone needed surgery. And she knew that better medical tools could mean the difference between life and death for many patients. Her team focused on designing innovative surgical equipment, tools that could help doctors perform operations more precisely and safely. The work was not easy. Many early prototypes failed. Some designs had to be completely rebuilt. There were moments when investors doubted the project and funding became tight. But Saad refused to quit. Slowly, the breakthroughs started coming. One of the first devices her company created helped surgeons perform delicate internal procedures with far greater accuracy. The technology reduced the risk of complications during emergency surgeries. Hospitals began testing it. Then more hospitals started asking for it. Within a few years, Saada's company grew far beyond that small workspace where it had started. The team expanded, the equipment improved, and their devices were soon being used in operating rooms across different cities. Doctors praised how much easier and safer the tools made their work. Medical conferences began inviting Saad to speak about the new technology her company was developing. Her ideas attracted global attention, and hospitals in other countries also began adopting her surgical equipment. It was a level of success that no one in her family had ever imagined. And there was something deeply ironic about it. The girl who had once been left alone in a hospital bed after surgery had grown up to create technology that helped save the lives of other patients during surgery. Every time Saad visited a hospital and saw doctors using equipment her company had designed, she felt a quiet sense of purpose. She knew that somewhere in one of those hospital rooms, a patient might be waking up after surgery. And this time, the tools helping save that patient's life were partly there because of her. While Saada's life was moving forward, things were slowly falling apart back at her parents' house. For many years, Saada's father had run a small trading business. It wasn't huge, but it had always been enough to support the family. Because of that stability, her parents had never worried too much about the future. Most of their attention had always gone to Kunal's football dreams. They believed Kunal would become a star. They believed one day he would play professionally and make the whole family proud. And for a while it actually looked possible. Kunal continued playing football through school and later joined a local club team. Her parents attended every match, cheering loudly from the stands just like they had done when he was younger. They told everyone in the neighborhood that their son was going to make it big. But life doesn't always follow the plans people make. One afternoon during an important match, everything changed. Kunal collided with another player while chasing the ball. The impact was hard, and he fell to the ground immediately, clutching his knee. At first everyone thought it was just a minor injury, but the doctor's diagnosis later was devastating. The ligament damage in his knee was severe. Even after surgery and therapy, the chances of him playing competitive football again were very low. Just like that, the dream that had shaped so much of the family's attention disappeared. Around the same time, Saada's father's business also started struggling. Several bad investments and market changes caused heavy losses. Within a couple of years, the business that had supported them for so long completely collapsed. Bills started piling up. Savings disappeared quickly. The house that once felt comfortable now felt heavy with financial pressure. For the first time in many years, Saada's parents began looking around and realizing how different things had become. Kunal, once the center of their hopes, was now struggling to figure out what to do with his future after the injury. And the daughter they had rarely focused on had quietly built an extraordinary life. One evening, Saada's mother was sitting in the living room scrolling through her phone when she suddenly froze. A news article had appeared on the screen. The headline showed a photo of a confident woman standing beside advanced medical equipment at an international conference. The name under the picture was impossible to miss. Saada Adebayo. The article talked about her medical technology company, the innovative surgical tools being used in hospitals around the world, and the growing impact of her work in modern medicine. Her mother stared at the screen in silence. A few minutes later, her father walked into the room. She slowly turned the phone toward him. "That's Saad," she said quietly. He took the phone and read the article carefully. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. A strange mixture of pride, surprise, and regret filled the room. Only now were they beginning to realize something they had ignored for years. The daughter they had once left alone in a hospital room had become the most successful person in the entire family. Saad had traveled to Accra for a major medical conference. She was there to present her latest research and showcase the new surgical tools her company had developed. The event was busy, filled with doctors, scientists, and media reporters from around the world. For Saad, it was just another step in a career she had built from the ground up. After her presentation, she decided to take a short break and visit a nearby hospital. It was a hospital she had never been to for work before, but something had drawn her there. Walking through the halls, she felt the familiar smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of life-saving machines. And then, as she passed the main reception, a memory hit her like a wave. This was the very hospital where she had undergone emergency surgery years ago, the night she had lain alone in the recovery room, her parents absent, her brother's football game more important than her life. For a moment Saad paused, letting the memories wash over her. The pain, the fear, the silence. She took a deep breath and moved on. She had come too far to let the past hold her now. As she walked past the hospital lobby, two familiar faces suddenly appeared. Her parents. They were standing near the elevator, staring at a digital screen showing a news feature about her medical company. Her mother's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her scarf. Her father's jaw was tight, his eyes wide with disbelief. Saad noticed them but didn't stop immediately. She watched quietly as they whispered to each other, their faces showing the regret they couldn't hide. They had recognized her instantly from the news feature, realizing that the girl they had once ignored and left alone had grown into someone extraordinary. Her mother took a hesitant step forward, but then stopped. Her father looked around nervously, unsure what to do. It was clear from the way they held themselves that they were both filled with shame, regret, and something like hope. They had never imagined that she would become this successful. Saad smiled softly to herself, a quiet, knowing smile. She had expected nothing from them, and yet here they were, finally seeing what they had once overlooked. The power in that realization felt almost satisfying, but it wasn't anger that filled her heart. It was calm. She had built her life with her own hands, with her own determination. For a few long seconds, Saad let the moment stretch, letting them see her as she had become, strong, confident, and untouchable by the past. Then she continued walking down the corridor, her head held high, leaving them in the hospital lobby with the quiet weight of their own choices. It was a reunion of sorts, but this time, Saad knew she didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. She had already claimed her life, and no one could take that away. Saad paused in the hospital lobby as her parents awkwardly stepped toward her. Their eyes flicked nervously between her and the floor, unsure what to say. Her mother cleared her throat, and her father rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. We didn't know you'd become this successful," her mother said finally, her voice quiet and hesitant. Saad listened calmly. She let their words hang in the air for a moment, taking in the regret and surprise on their faces. For a second, she almost remembered the little girl who had once hoped for their attention, who had waited in a hospital bed, scared and alone. Then she straightened her shoulders and met their eyes. Her voice was calm, steady, and quiet, but it carried the weight of everything they had ignored. "The night I needed you most, you chose a football game," she said. Her parents flinched slightly. The words were simple, but they carried all the pain, all the loneliness, and all the truth of years they had refused to see. Saad didn't wait for an apology, didn't argue, and didn't demand anything. She had learned long ago that her life wasn't theirs to control. Turning away, Saad walked slowly down the hospital corridor. The soft hum of machines and the quiet footsteps of nurses and doctors filled the space. Patients in nearby rooms glanced at her as she passed, some smiling politely, others lost in their own thoughts. She smiled back at them, a small, warm smile that held a sense of connection, empathy, and quiet triumph. Every step reminded her how far she had come, from the scared, abandoned girl on that hospital bed to the woman whose research and innovations now helped save lives during surgeries. She had built herself entirely on her own strength. As she reached the end of the corridor and looked out toward the bustling hospital, a thought crossed her mind. The pain, the abandonment, the long nights of loneliness, they hadn't destroyed her. They had shaped her. she whispered softly to herself, almost like a promise. The girl they left alone after surgery grew up to change how surgeries save lives. And with that, she walked forward, confident, unstoppable, and finally free from the past.